The first thing I noticed was the silence. No traffic. No sirens. No electronic hum of a city that never sleeps. I opened my eyes to an ornate ceiling painted with cranes and lotus flowers, and for a disorienting moment, thought I was in a museum. Then the pain hit, a dull ache throughout my entire body, like I'd been sick for weeks. "Mistress, you're awake," a young girl cried out, rushing to my bedside with relief flooding her face. "We thought," the physician said. "Oh, thank the heavens." I stared at her traditional robes, her weird hairstyle, the way she knelt beside the bed like something out of a historical drama. My mind scrambled for logic, for explanation. The last thing I remembered was reviewing depositions in a taxi. Then the screech of brakes. Metal crunching. Pain. I should be dead. "Where am I?" I asked, my voice coming out hoarse and unfamiliar. The girl looked confused. "You're in your chambers, mistress," she said. "In the Western Palace. You've been ill for 7 days. Western Palace. Chambers." The pieces clicked together in a way that made no logical sense, yet here I was. "What's your name?" I asked carefully. Now she looked genuinely worried. "It's Zealand, mistress," she replied. "Your personal maid. Have you forgotten me?" "I'm just confused from the illness," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Tell me, what's my name?" "Concubine Bai He," Zealand said slowly, as if testing whether I was losing my mind. "You've been in His Majesty's harem for 3 years. Concubine. Harem. 3 years. I definitely wasn't in modern times anymore. Over the next few days, I pieced together my new reality through careful questioning and observation. The girl whose body I now inhabited, Bai He, had been a minor concubine, virtually invisible in the king's vast harem. According to Zealand, she'd been quiet, timid, and had never once received a royal summons to the king's chambers. I had no recollection of her experiences, no sense of having lived her life. It was as though I'd been dropped into a stranger's existence with nothing but what others told me about who she'd been. "Mistress, you must prepare for the morning assembly," Zealand announced on my 4th day awake. "All concubines are required to attend." "What happens if I don't?" I asked. She looked scandalized. "You'd be punished," she exclaimed. "No one refuses a palace summons." I considered refusing anyway. Why should I bow to some ancient king I'd never met? But decided information gathering was more valuable than pointless rebellion. I needed to understand this place before I could figure out how to survive it. The assembly hall was massive, filled with women in silk robes so elaborate they probably cost a fortune. I took a position in the back, where Zealand indicated was appropriate for lower-ranked concubines, and observed. The king entered with ceremony that felt excessive even for royalty. King Chen Hao was handsome in a classical way, all sharp features and careful composure. He barely glanced at the assembled concubines before launching into announcements about upcoming festivals and policy changes. His gaze never once landed on me. Perfect. I had no interest in catching his attention anyway. But then I noticed her, the woman in crimson at the front of the hall, whose beauty was undeniable even by modern standards. The way other concubines deferred to her, the proprietary way she watched the king. "That's consort Yenling," Zealand whispered to me. "His Majesty's favorite. She's been, well, everyone knows she's special to him." I watched Yenling smile at something the king said, and watched him nod politely in return. No passion there, I noted. Just performance for an audience. The assembly concluded, and I tried to leave quickly, but Yenling appeared in my path like she'd been waiting. "Concubine Bai He," she said, her voice dripping honey. "I heard you were ill. How? Unfortunate that you've recovered." I raised an eyebrow. "Should I have stayed sick?" I asked. Her perfect smile didn't waver. "Some people are more valuable when they're invisible," she said. "You might want to remember that. In my old life, I'd dealt with corporate sharks who could destroy careers with a phone call. This palace mean girl didn't intimidate me." "I'll try to contain my visibility," I replied dryly. "Thanks for the advice." I walked away before she could respond, ignoring Zealand's panicked expression. "Mistress, you can't speak to Lady Yenling that way," my maid protested once we were out of earshot. "She could make your life unbearable." "Then my life will be unbearable," I said calmly. "I'm not interested in playing nice with bullies." The next morning, I woke to Zealand's urgent voice. "Mistress, something terrible has happened," she cried, her face pale with distress. I followed her to my courtyard and stopped short. Every plant had been uprooted and trampled into the dirt. My small koi pond had been drained, the fish left gasping on the ground, though Zealand had managed to save 2 of them. The wooden bench where I liked to sit had been smashed to pieces. And painted across my chamber wall in bold black strokes were the words, "Know your place, mouse." It was Lady Yenling, Zealand whispered, tears streaming down her face. It had to be. After you spoke to her yesterday. We don't know that for certain, I said, though of course it was obvious. And even if we did, who would we report it to? His Majesty, she began. No, I interrupted firmly. Running to the king would make me look weak, exactly what she wants. We clean this up ourselves. And we wait. Wait for what? Zealand asked. For her to make a bigger mistake, I replied, already thinking through strategies. Bullies always escalate when their first attack doesn't work. We spent the day cleaning. Other concubines walked past my courtyard, some with sympathetic looks, most with carefully blank expressions. No one offered help. That was the law of the harem. Align yourself with the wrong person, and you'd become a target too. By evening, my courtyard looked presentable again, though the bare patches where plants had been served as stark reminders. I was exhausted, covered in dirt, and my hands were blistered from hauling broken furniture. Lady Bai He, a eunuch called, appearing at my gate with a neutral expression. His Majesty requests your presence in the Eastern Garden. My stomach sank. Of course he'd summon me today, when I looked like I'd been wrestling in mud. Tell His Majesty I'm indisposed, I said. The eunuch's eyes widened. Lady Bai He, you cannot refuse, he started. Tell him I'm covered in dirt from cleaning, and I'm in no condition to attend anyone, including royalty, I said. He'll understand. The eunuch left looking like I'd just committed treason. Zealand grabbed my arm the moment he was gone. Mistress, have you lost your mind? She demanded. Possibly, I admitted. But I'm not going to jump just because some king snaps his fingers. I have actual problems to deal with. 20 minutes later, King Chen Hao himself appeared at my courtyard gate. I stared at him in genuine surprise. Kings didn't make house calls. You're indisposed, he said, taking in my dirt-stained robes and disheveled hair. Very, I confirmed. And covered in dirt, he observed. Evidently, I replied. A pause hung between us. Someone vandalized your quarters, he finally said. Someone did, I agreed. I'm handling it. By cleaning it yourself? He asked, his tone suggesting this was somehow remarkable. Should I have left it destroyed? I countered. I didn't see a cleaning service on offer. The corner of his mouth twitched. You could have reported it, he pointed out. To the person who probably ordered it? I asked bluntly. That seems inefficient. You think Lady Yenling did this? He said. I think someone wants me frightened and submissive, I replied honestly. Whether that's Yenling specifically or just palace culture generally, I don't particularly care. The result is the same, vandalized property and an attempt at intimidation. He studied me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. The reports I received about you, they painted a very different picture, he said slowly. Reports can be inaccurate, I said with a shrug. Or maybe I just got tired of being what everyone expected. People change. I can see that, he said thoughtfully. He glanced at the destruction around us. I'll assign guards to patrol the concubine quarters at night. Additional protection. That's unnecessary, I started. It's necessary, he said firmly. Vandalism in my palace reflects poorly on my ability to maintain order. Consider it a matter of royal pride, not special treatment. Before I could argue further, he left. Zealand rushed to my side the moment he was gone. Mistress, the king came here himself, she exclaimed. I noticed, I said. Do you know what that means, she pressed. That he takes property damage seriously? I suggested. It means he's interested in you. Zealand insisted. I rolled my eyes. He's interested in maintaining order, I said. Don't read romance into administrative efficiency. But over the next week I noticed him. Not because I was looking, I deliberately avoided looking, but because he kept appearing in my peripheral vision. In the library when I went to read about this kingdom's history, he was there, supposedly reviewing documents. In the gardens when I took morning walks, he would be consulting with advisors nearby. At assemblies, his gaze would sweep the room and pause, just briefly, when it reached me in the back. I ignored it all, because engaging meant getting tangled in palace politics I had no interest in. His Majesty is asking about you, Concubine showing told me one afternoon. I'd sought her out for information. She was shrewd, observant, and seemed less invested in harem drama than other concubines. Asking what? I said, not looking up from the history text I was reading. Why you never attend optional gatherings, she replied. Why you stay in your quarters so much. Whether you're unwell. I'm perfectly well, I said. Just uninterested in socializing. Showing laughed. You can't tell the king you're uninterested in socializing, she said. That's essentially saying you're uninterested in him. I am uninterested in him, I stated plainly. She stared at me. You're either insane or playing coy, she said. I genuinely can't tell which. The situation escalated 2 weeks later when a eunuch delivered a formal invitation. His Majesty requested my company for dinner in his private quarters. This is a huge honor. Zealand practically vibrated with excitement. His Majesty never, this means. Tell him I decline, I said to the eunuch. Dead silence filled the room. Lady Bai He, the eunuch said carefully, one does not decline a royal invitation. I just did, I replied. Tell His Majesty I appreciate the invitation, but I'm not interested in private dinners. After the eunuch left in shock, Zealand looked at me with something approaching horror. Why would you refuse? She demanded. Every concubine dreams of a private audience with His Majesty. I'm not every concubine, I pointed out. I don't dream of anything involving this harem. I'm just trying to survive here. But mistress, she began. No buts, I interrupted. I didn't ask to be here, and I'm not going to pretend to be grateful for attention I never wanted. An hour later, Chen Hao appeared at my gate. Again. You declined my dinner invitation, he said without preamble. I did, I confirmed. Why, he asked. Because I'm not interested in having dinner with you, I said honestly. He looked genuinely taken aback. Most women would, he started. I'm not most women, I interrupted. Clearly, he said. But I'm curious, is it me specifically you're not interested in, or the situation in general? Both, I replied. Being king doesn't automatically make you interesting company. And the situation is fundamentally unequal. You summon, I'm supposed to obey. That's not a dinner invitation, that's a command. For a long moment he just stared at me. Then he laughed, a real laugh, not the polite sounds he made in court. You think I might be uninteresting, he said, still smiling. It's a possibility, I said. He shook his head. Has anyone ever told you you're remarkably honest? He asked. A few people, I admitted. Is there something else you needed? I have things to do. The slight edge in my voice made him pause. I came to understand your refusal, he said more seriously. Everyone else in this palace treats me like a prize to be won. You treat me like an interruption to your day. Because you are an interruption, I said bluntly. Your attention makes me a target. Lady Yenling already vandalized my quarters once. If you keep showing up here, she'll escalate. I'll protect you, he began. I don't want your protection, I interrupted firmly. I want to be left alone. Is that really so difficult to understand? He studied me carefully. Yes, he said finally. Because no one has ever wanted to be left alone by me before. It's novel. Happy to provide novelty, I said. Now if you'll excuse me. I turned and walked into my chambers, closing the door firmly behind me. Zealand was waiting, eyes wide with disbelief. You just dismissed the king, she hissed. I did, I agreed. He could have you punished, she said. Then he'd be proving my point about being a poor dinner companion, I replied. Something tells me he won't. I was right. No punishment came. 3 days later, a package appeared at my chamber door. Inside was a collection of historical texts about the kingdom's legal system, the kind of detailed records I'd been searching for in the library. There was no note, no claim of credit, but I knew who'd sent it. He's persistent, I muttered to myself. He's the king, Zealand said. Of course he's persistent. I opened one of the texts and found a slip of paper tucked inside that read, Perhaps these will be more interesting than dinner. Despite myself, I smiled. The books were followed by other small gestures over the following days. A rare tea from the northern provinces appeared with my breakfast. A note with a terrible joke about historical legal disputes made me laugh out loud. An invitation to walk in the gardens at dawn when no one else would be there. This one I actually considered. After ignoring 3 more invitations, curiosity finally got the better of me. The gardens at dawn were beautiful in a way the daytime crowds obscured, mist rising from ponds, birds just beginning to sing. Chen Hao was waiting by the lotus pond, wearing simple robes instead of royal regalia. "You came," he said, and he sounded genuinely surprised. "I was curious," I admitted, "about why you're pursuing someone who's made it clear she's not interested." "Because you're the first person who talks to me honestly," he said simply. "Everyone else performs. They tell me what they think I want to hear, they angle for advantage, they play games. You just say what you think." "That's not special," I said. "That's just basic communication." "In this palace, it's extraordinary," he replied. He gestured to the path. "Walk with me." I fell into step beside him, maintaining careful distance. "You realize your attention is making my life more difficult," I pointed out. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry for that." His apology surprised me. "So why continue?" I asked. "Because I'm selfish," he admitted. "Because talking to you makes me feel less alone. Because—" He paused. "Because I spend every day being a crown, and with you, I almost feel like a person." The raw honesty in his voice caught me off guard. This wasn't practiced charm or strategic flirtation. This was genuine loneliness. "I'm not who you think I am," I said carefully. "Then who are you?" he asked. How could I answer that? "I'm a dead lawyer from another world, trapped in a concubine's body, trying to survive in a place I don't understand? I'm someone who doesn't belong here," I said finally. "Someone who doesn't want palace life or harem politics or—" I gestured between us, "whatever this is becoming." "What if it's just 2 people talking?" he offered. "No politics, no palace. Just conversation." "There's no such thing as just conversation between a king and his concubine," I said. "There could be," he insisted. "If we chose it." I wanted to refuse. Wanted to maintain the walls I'd built. But standing there in the misty garden, with him looking at me that way, I couldn't. "One walk," I said. "Just this once. Then you let me be." He smiled. "Agreed," he said. We walked and talked until the sun fully rose. He told me about the weight of decisions, the isolation of authority, the impossible balance between duty and desire. I told him about feeling displaced, about not understanding the rules of this world, about preferring honesty to performance. I was careful not to reveal too much. No mentions of modern life or time travel or the fact that I wasn't really Bai He. But I gave him real pieces of myself, the woman who'd died feeling unseen, the person who valued genuine connection over superficial pleasantries. When we finally parted at my courtyard gate, I was exhausted from the emotional honesty. "Thank you," Chen Hao said quietly. "For the walk. For the conversation. Don't make it a habit," I warned. "Too late," he said softly. "You've already become one." Over the following weeks, he pursued me with quiet determination that was increasingly hard to resist. Not grand gestures or public declarations. Those would have painted a target on my back. Instead, it was stolen moments. Notes left in books. Dawn walks when the palace still slept. Brief conversations in the library where he'd ask my opinion on matters of governance, and actually listen to my answers. And despite my best intentions, my walls began to crack. I noticed things I didn't want to notice. The way he listened when I spoke, like every word mattered. How he asked questions that showed he actually cared about my answers, not just waiting for his turn to talk. The occasional genuine smile that transformed his carefully composed features. "You're softening toward him," Xiaoying observed during one of our tea sessions. "I'm not," I lied. "You are," she insisted. "You get this look when someone mentions him. Like you're trying not to seem interested and failing miserably." I groaned. "This is a terrible idea," I said. "Probably," she agreed. "But when has that ever stopped anyone from falling in love?" "I'm not falling in love," I protested. "Keep telling yourself that," she said with a knowing smile. But she was right. I was falling, slowly and against every logical objection my brain could raise. Falling for his intelligence, his unexpected humor, the way he saw me as a person instead of a possession or a conquest. It terrified me. The Mid-Autumn Festival was announced 3 weeks later, bringing with it the requirement that all concubines demonstrate artistic talents before the court. musical performance, painting, or poetry recitation. All traditional arts meant to showcase refinement and culture. I had none of those skills. And apparently the original Bai He was no better. "Mistress, what will you perform?" Zilan asked anxiously as the festival drew closer. "You must prepare something." "I'm still deciding," I lied. Truth was, I had no idea. I couldn't play traditional instruments, my painting was mediocre at best, and my knowledge of classical poetry was non-existent. I was going to humiliate myself, and Lady Yenling knew it. "Such a shame you'll have to perform," she said with false sympathy during an assembly. "Everyone knows you have no particular talents." "I'm full of surprises," I replied evenly. "We'll see," she said with a cold smile. That evening, panic was setting in. I sat in my chambers surrounded by poetry scrolls I barely understood, trying to memorize verses that refused to stick in my mind. "This is hopeless," I muttered, throwing down another scroll in frustration. "Mistress, perhaps you could paint something?" Zilan suggested hopefully. "A simple landscape?" "My landscapes look like a child's scribbles," I said. "That would be even more humiliating." A soft knock came at my gate. Zilan opened it to reveal Chen Hao, dressed in simple robes and clearly attempting to visit discreetly. "Your Majesty," Zilan said, bowing quickly. "Leave us," he said gently. "I'll stay only a moment." Once we were alone, he took in the scattered scrolls and my obvious distress. "You're worried about the festival," he observed. "I'm preparing to be publicly humiliated," I corrected. "There's a difference." He sat beside me carefully. "What if you did something unexpected?" he suggested. "Like what?" I asked. "I'm not trained in any of these traditional arts. Music, painting, poetry. I'm terrible at all of them." He looked genuinely surprised. "How is that possible?" he asked. "Most women of the palace are trained from childhood." "Well, I wasn't," I interrupted quickly, realizing my mistake. I came from a provincial family. We didn't have access to proper instructors." It was a weak lie, but he seemed to accept it. "Then don't try to compete in traditional arts," he said thoughtfully. "Do something that plays to what you are good at." "And what would that be?" I asked skeptically. "You have a way with words," he said. "When you describe things, you make complex ideas clear and engaging. You could tell a story, something meaningful that would resonate with the audience." I'd had the same thought but dismissed it as too unconventional. "Storytelling isn't a festival art," I said. "Why not?" he challenged. "Our entire culture is built on stories, historical records, parables, wisdom passed down through generations. Stories teach and preserve our values." "The other concubines will object," I pointed out. "They'll say it's not legitimate." "Let them object," he said. "If anyone challenges you, remind them that our greatest scholars were storytellers. Our histories are narratives. If they dismiss your performance, they're dismissing the foundation of our culture." I stared at him. "That's actually clever," I admitted. "I have my moments," he said with a slight smile. "But what would I even talk about?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Tell them about something you believe in," he suggested. "About strength or wisdom or seeing the truth beneath appearances. Make them think. That's more valuable than perfect technique in an instrument most of them will forget by tomorrow." After he left, I sat in my chambers thinking about his words. And slowly, a story began to form in my mind. Over the next few days, I crafted my narrative carefully. A tale about a woman who lived in a golden cage and was told she should be grateful because the bars were gilded. About how she learned that the most dangerous thing she could do was refuse to accept her powerlessness. About finding authentic strength instead of performed grace. It wasn't subtle. Anyone paying attention would see the parallels to harem life. But it was also beautiful and moving in a way I hoped would transcend the political undertones. The festival arrived with elaborate ceremony. The main courtyard had been transformed with decorations, red lanterns, silk banners, and a raised platform for performances. Court officials, nobles, and palace residents filled every available space. I stood with the other concubines, my stomach churning with nerves. Lady Yenling looked radiant in crimson robes embroidered with beautiful flowers, her expression serene and confident. She performed first, naturally, as acting head of the inner court. Her Guqin performance was flawless, technically perfect, emotionally moving, exactly the kind of traditional beauty everyone expected. The crowd applauded enthusiastically, and Yenling bowed gracefully, shooting me a triumphant look as she descended from the platform. Several other concubines performed next, poetry recitations, paintings unveiled, elegant dances. All beautiful, all technically proficient, all beginning to blur together in their similarity. Then the official called my name. Concubine Bai He. I walked to the platform with my head high, carrying no instrument, no painting, nothing but myself. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Your Majesty, honored guests, I began, projecting my voice clearly. I know what you expect from me today. Music, perhaps, or poetry. But I've decided to offer something different. I'd like to tell you a story. Lady Yenling's expression flickered with confusion, then calculation. She didn't know how to react to this. There once was a woman, I began, who lived in a golden cage. She was told she should be grateful. The bars were gilded, after all. She was fed well, dressed beautifully, given everything except freedom. I wove the tale carefully, speaking of how the woman learned to speak her own truth despite the cost. How sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was refuse to play by rules designed to keep you powerless. How she found that real strength came from being authentically herself, rather than performing what others expected. When I finished, silence hung over the courtyard. Then Chen Hao began to applaud, a slow, deliberate sound that others quickly joined. The applause wasn't as enthusiastic as Yenling's had been, but it was thoughtful considering. An interesting choice, Concubine Bai He, Minister Jiaoming said, standing from his seat. Though some might argue storytelling is not a traditional festival art. Storytelling is how we preserve wisdom and history, I replied, echoing Chen Hao's earlier words. Are our ancient texts not stories? Are historical records not narratives? If we dismiss storytelling as unworthy, we dismiss the very foundation of our culture. The elderly minister smiled slightly. The girl makes a valid point, he said. Storytelling is indeed an ancient and honored tradition. Her performance was unconventional, but that doesn't make it unworthy. Lady Yenling looked like she'd swallowed something sour. She'd expected me to fail, to humiliate myself with poor music or terrible poetry. Instead, I'd done something she couldn't attack without looking petty or culturally ignorant. After the festival ended, I retreated to my chambers, emotionally exhausted from the performance and the scrutiny. Chen Hao found me in the gardens that evening, sitting by the pond where we'd first walked together. That was brilliant, he said, sitting beside me without asking permission. It was risky, I replied. It was perfect, he insisted. You turned their expectations into an advantage. Even Yenling couldn't find a way to criticize you without looking foolish. She'll find another way to attack, I said. This isn't over. I know, he said seriously. He was quiet for a moment, then turned to face me fully. Bai He, I can't keep pretending this is casual curiosity. I need to tell you something. My heart began to race. Chen Hao, I started. I'm falling in love with you, he said, the words tumbling out. Maybe I've already fallen. I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first time you refused my dinner invitation, or when you walked away from me like I was just another person bothering you. But I think about you constantly. You're the first thought when I wake, and the last before I sleep. He took a shaky breath. I know I already have you as my concubine. I could summon you to my chambers any time I wish. But that's not what I want. I want your heart, Bai He. Your genuine feelings. And I needed you to know how I feel, even if, his voice caught. Even if you can never feel the same way. I stared at him, my mind reeling. This powerful king, who could command my presence with a word, who already owned my body by law, was sitting here vulnerable and uncertain, asking, not demanding, for something he couldn't simply take. You're the king, I said slowly, trying to understand. I'm your concubine. You already have me. Why does it matter whether I love you back? You could just command you to my bed, he finished quietly. Yes, I could. But I'd know the truth, that you were there out of obligation, not desire. That your smiles were performance, not joy. That every tender word was calculated compliance. He looked at me with such raw honesty it hurt. I don't want a woman who obeys me. I want a woman who chooses me. Who loves me not because I'm the king, but despite it. My throat tightened. That's a dangerous thing to want, I whispered. I know, he admitted. It makes me vulnerable in ways a king should never be. But with you, I can't seem to help it. I could use that against you, I pointed out. Knowing you want something I could withhold. You could, he agreed. But you won't. That's not who you are. He was right, and somehow that made this even more terrifying. Because he was offering me real power over him. Not the hollow power of physical beauty or manipulation, but the profound power of being genuinely loved. I'm scared, I finally admitted. Not of you exactly, but of this. Of giving you my heart, and then watching you tire of me the way you tired of Yenling. Of loving you and becoming just another desperate woman competing for scraps of your attention. I never loved Yenling, he said firmly. I respected her, valued her presence, but I never loved her. What I feel for you is, he struggled for words. It's consuming, terrifying, nothing like anything I've felt before. That could change, I said quietly. Feelings change. You might wake up one day and realize I'm not worth all this risk. Then that's my risk to take, he replied. But I don't think that will happen. Because every day I know you, you surprise me. Challenge me. Make me want to be better than I am. He reached for my hand carefully, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. I'm asking for your heart, Bai He. Not as a king to his concubine, but as a man to the woman he loves. You can refuse me. You can keep your heart guarded. I'll accept that. But I needed you to know the truth of how I feel. I looked at our joined hands, then up at his face, vulnerable and hopeful and utterly sincere. I'm falling in love with you too, I whispered finally. I didn't want to. It's dangerous and complicated, and everything I swore I'd avoid. But I am. Relief and joy flooded his expression. Truly? He asked, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Truly, I confirmed, though I reserved the right to be terrified about it. He laughed shakily and took my hand in his. We can be terrified together, he murmured. I took a deep breath. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, I said carefully. Like I woke up one day and I was in a world I didn't recognize, following rules I didn't understand. And everyone expected me to just know how to be this person I wasn't. I watched his face, waiting for confusion. Instead, he smiled gently. You have quite an imagination, he said. You should write poetry or stories with thoughts like that. You'd be quite successful. The irony wasn't lost on me. You think I'm being fanciful, I said. I think you're describing something we all feel sometimes, he replied. That sense of not quite fitting where we are. He took my hand. But whoever you feel you are, whatever life you think you should be living, this is where you are now. With me. And I love the person you are in this moment. Something in his words, the acceptance, the lack of judgment, broke through my last defenses. I'm falling in love with you too, I whispered. I didn't want to. It's complicated and terrifying and probably a terrible idea. But I am. He pulled me into his arms then, holding me like I was something precious. It's not a terrible idea, he murmured against my hair. It's the best idea I've ever had. You're biased, I said, but I was smiling against his chest. Completely, he agreed. We sat there as the sun set, wrapped in each other, and for the first time since waking in this strange world, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. The next morning brought harsh reality crashing back. I woke to shouting outside my chambers. Zilan burst through the door, her face pale with terror. Lady Bai He, there's been a fire, she cried. In the western quarters, Concubine Yuchan's chambers. They're saying, her voice dropped to a horrified whisper. They're saying you started it. What? I sat up quickly, my mind racing. That's absurd. I was in my chambers all night. You know that. I know, mistress, but the guards are saying someone saw you near the western quarters yesterday afternoon, she said frantically. And they found evidence that the fire was set deliberately. Before I could process this, royal guards appeared at my door. Concubine Bai He, the captain said formally. You are summoned before His Majesty and the ministers to answer charges of arson. My heart sank. This was a setup, it had to be. But by whom? The throne room was filled with officials and ministers when I arrived. Chen Hao sat on his throne, his expression carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in his jaw. Lady Yenling knelt near the front among the other concubines, her face a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. Concubine Bai He, Minister Fengliang began severely, you stand accused of arson and attempted murder. What do you say to these charges? I say they're false, I replied calmly. I was in my chambers all afternoon and evening. My maid can confirm this. Maids are loyal to their mistresses, another minister pointed out. They would lie to protect you. Then question the guards who patrol the quarters, I suggested. They see everyone who comes and goes. We did question them, Feng Liang said. 2 guards reported seeing someone in robes matching your description near the western quarters around the time the fire started. Someone in robes matching my description, I repeated carefully. Not me specifically. Concubine's robes all look similar from a distance, especially in the evening light. Nevertheless, the evidence is concerning, Feng Liang pressed. Combined with your history of conflict with other concubines. What history? I interrupted. I've had one disagreement with Lady Yanling months ago. Since then, I've kept to myself. I have no reason to harm concubine Yuchan. I barely know her. There are also reports of your unusual behavior, another minister added. Your personality changed dramatically after your illness. Your unusual knowledge, your strange ideas. We're not here to discuss my personality. I cut in sharply. We're here because someone set a fire and tried to frame me for it. Instead of investigating who actually committed the crime, you're wasting time on circumstantial evidence and gossip. How dare you speak to the king's ministers with such disrespect? Feng Liang snapped. How dare you accuse me of attempted murder without actual evidence? I shot back. You have guards who saw someone in similar robes at a distance. That's not proof. That's lazy investigation designed to confirm what you already assumed. The throne room erupted in shocked murmurs. Chen Hao raised his hand for silence, his eyes never leaving my face. Concubine Bai He makes a valid point, he said quietly. The evidence presented is circumstantial at best. Have we investigated other possibilities? Other concubines who might benefit from framing her? Your Majesty, with respect, Minister Jiaoming said carefully. The question must be asked, why would anyone frame concubine Bai He specifically? Because I've made enemies, I said bluntly. Because I refused to play by harem rules, and that made people uncomfortable. Because framing the kings, I caught myself before saying favorite. Because framing someone who has caught His Majesty's attention is an excellent way to remove a rival. So you admit you're His Majesty's favorite? Feng Liang pounced on my words. I admit that some people perceive me that way, I corrected. And that perception makes me a target. Chen Hao's expression had gone cold. I want a thorough investigation, he commanded. Question every concubine, every servant, every guard. Find out who actually set that fire. Until then, concubine Bai He is confined to her quarters but not formally charged. Your Majesty, Feng Liang protested. That's my decision, Chen Hao said with finality. This assembly is dismissed. As guards escorted me back to my chambers, I caught sight of Lady Yanling in the corridor. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something unexpected in her expression, not triumph but concern. Almost like she was trying to warn me about something. Then I understood. This wasn't Yanling's scheme. Someone else was playing a deeper game, and both of us were pieces on the board. Back in my chambers, Zilan was near tears. Mistress, they think you tried to kill concubine Yuchan, she sobbed. I know, I said, my mind already working through possibilities. Zilan, tell me everything you know about Yuchan. Who are her allies? Her enemies? What would anyone gain from attacking her? Zilan thought for a moment, wiping her eyes. Yuchan is quiet, keeps to herself mostly, she said. But I've heard whispers, rumors that she was meeting secretly with someone. A man from outside the palace. What kind of man? I asked, leaning forward. I don't know, she admitted. Just whispers about secret meetings in the gardens at night. If it's true, if she was having an affair. That's a death sentence, I finished. For both her and her lover. A terrible possibility was forming in my mind. What if the fire wasn't meant to kill Yuchan? What if it was meant to destroy evidence of her affair? Letters, gifts, anything that could prove the relationship? Framing me was just a convenient bonus, I muttered. 2 problems solved with 1 fire. Mistress? Zilan called, looking genuinely confused. Never mind, I said. I need to think. That night, despite being confined to my quarters, I waited until Zilan fell asleep, and then slipped out using a servant's passage she'd shown me weeks ago. I made my way to the western quarters, now charred. I searched through the ruins carefully by moonlight, looking for anything that might have survived. In a corner that had been partially protected by fallen beams, I found a small metal box, dented but intact. Inside were letters love letters between Yu-chan and someone who signed only as your devoted heart. But it was the seal on one of the envelopes that made my blood run cold. I recognized that family crest. I'd seen it in court. It belonged to Minister Feng Liang's family. Looking for evidence? A voice said behind me. I spun around to find Lady Yanling standing in the shadows, wrapped in a dark cloak. What are you doing here? I demanded, quickly hiding the box behind my back. The same thing you are, she replied, moving closer. Trying to find the truth. Why would you help me? I asked suspiciously. Because I didn't do this, she said firmly. And neither did you. Someone is playing us both. I studied her face, looking for deception. Instead, I saw something unexpected: sincerity. Did you know about Yu-chan's affair? I asked carefully. Not until after the fire, she admitted. But I suspected someone was setting you up. The evidence was too convenient, too neat. I hesitated, then showed her the letters and the family seal. Yu-chan was involved with Feng Liang's son, I said. The fire wasn't about killing her. It was about destroying proof of a scandal that would disgrace his family. Yanling's eyes widened. And framing you, she started. Serves a second purpose, I finished. I've challenged Feng Liang's authority multiple times in court. I've questioned his decisions. He wants me gone. This is more serious than harem politics, Yanling said quietly. If you're right, we're dealing with a powerful minister willing to commit arson and frame you for murder. Oui. I raised an eyebrow. She smiled slightly. Temporary alliance, she offered. We may not like each other, but neither of us deserves to be destroyed by Feng Liang's schemes. I considered her outstretched hand, then took it. Temporary alliance, I agreed. Over the next 2 days, Yanling and I worked together in secret. She used her position as head of the inner court to question servants and guards, while I analyzed the information we gathered, looking for patterns and inconsistencies. We discovered that Minister Feng Liang had been behaving strangely in the weeks before the fire, short-tempered, anxious, constantly leaving court sessions for urgent private matters. There's something else, Yanling said during one of our late-night meetings in her chambers. Minister Zhaoming's secretary mentioned that Zhaoming had requested a private audience with Feng Liang 2 weeks before the fire. The conversation was heated, shouting could be heard through the doors. What were they arguing about? I asked. The secretary didn't know, she replied. But Zhaoming looked satisfied afterward, and Feng Liang looked like a man facing ruin. A possibility began forming in my mind. What if Zhaoming discovered the affair between Feng Liang's son and Yu-chan? I said slowly. What if he threatened to expose it? That would destroy Feng Liang's family, Yanling said thoughtfully. The scandal of his son having an affair with the king's concubine. They'd lose everything. Their position, their wealth, their honor. Exactly, I said. And if Zhaoming was threatening exposure, Feng Liang would be desperate. Desperate enough to eliminate the evidence, Yanling finished. Kill Yu-chan and destroy the letters she kept from his son. We continued investigating. A laundry maid mentioned seeing one of the palace guards, the same one who claimed to have seen me near the western quarters, suddenly paying off debts he'd owed for months. When pressed, she admitted he'd been bragging about coming into unexpected wealth. He was bribed, I said, examining our compiled evidence. Someone paid him to set the fire and claim he saw me near the scene. But we still need to connect it to Feng Liang, Yanling pointed out. The bribed guard could have been working for anyone. Not anyone, I said. Only someone who benefits from both Yu-chan's death and my disgrace. Feng Liang has been opposing me in council for months. I've challenged his authority, questioned his decisions. Getting rid of me while covering up his family's scandal. That's 2 problems solved with 1 fire. We need a confession, Yanling said. Either from the guard or from Feng Liang's son. The son, I decided. He loved Yu-chan. If he knew his father tried to kill her. I paused. He might not even know. Feng Liang could have acted without telling him the full plan. Yanling nodded slowly. Then we use his ignorance against him. The next evening, I sent a message to Feng Liang's son through a servant we'd bribed. Yu-chan survived the fire and is asking for you. Meet me in the Eastern Gardens at midnight, and I'll arrange for you to see her. It was cruel, using his love as bait. But we were out of options. Midnight found Yanling and me hidden in the gardens. Chen Hao was there too. I'd finally told him everything, and he'd insisted on being present with guards positioned nearby, but out of sight. Feng Liang's son arrived exactly on time, his face desperate with hope and fear. "Where is she?" he demanded, looking around frantically. "Where's Yuchan? Is she truly alive?" I stepped out of the shadows. "She's alive," I said quietly. "Barely. She nearly died in the fire your father arranged." His face drained of all color. "What? No, my father didn't, he wouldn't," he stammered. "He did," Yanling said, emerging from her hiding spot. "Minister Jiaoming discovered your affair and threatened to expose it. Your father decided to eliminate the scandal, permanently." "That's impossible," the young man protested, but his voice shook. He said he'd handle the situation quietly, that we'd make sure the letters were destroyed, and Yuchan would be sent away somewhere safe. He promised no one would be hurt. "Did he tell you how he planned to accomplish that?" I asked carefully. "He said," the young man's voice broke. "He said he'd arrange for someone to retrieve the letters from her chambers. That once we had them, we could pay her to leave the palace quietly, give her enough money to live comfortably far away where no one knew about the affair." "But that's not what he did," Chen Hao said, stepping into the lamplight. The young man's eyes went wide with terror at seeing the king. He dropped to his knees immediately, trembling so violently he could barely speak. "Your Majesty, I swear I never wanted." "Stand up," Chen Hao commanded, his voice cold. "And tell us exactly what your father told you." The young man rose shakily. "2 weeks ago, Minister Jiaoming confronted my father," he said, words tumbling out frantically. "He had evidence of my relationship with Yuchan. He'd been watching us, gathering proof. He threatened to bring it before your Majesty unless my father resigned his position." "And your father refused," I said. "He said he'd worked too hard to let a blackmailer destroy him," the young man confirmed. "He told me we needed to handle the situation before Jiaoming could act. I thought we were just going to destroy the letters and send Yuchan away. He said one of his household servants would slip into the palace, retrieve the letters from her chambers, and she'd be quietly relocated to a country estate with enough silver to keep her comfortable and silent." "When did the plan change?" Yanling asked. "I don't know that it did," the young man said desperately. "My father told me everything was arranged, that his man would take care of it. I didn't know." His voice broke completely. "I didn't know he meant setting a fire. I didn't know he planned to kill her. Oh gods, I didn't know. Yet here we are," Chen Hao said icily. "A fire was set. Yuchan nearly burned to death. And a palace guard was bribed to claim he saw Concubine Bai He near the scene, conveniently implicating someone your father wanted removed from court." The young man was crying now, shoulders shaking. "He never told me about that part," he sobbed. "I swear on my ancestors, your Majesty, I never knew he planned murder. I loved her. I love her. I would never—" He couldn't continue. "Tell us exactly what your father arranged," I said more gently now. "Who did he send? How was the guard bribed?" Through tears, the confession emerged. Feng Liang had tasked one of his most trusted household guards, a man who'd served the family for years, with handling the situation. The guard had bribed a palace guard to give him access through a side entrance and to later testify about seeing me near the western quarters. The household guard had entered Yuchan's chambers while she slept, stolen the letters she'd kept from the minister's son, then set fire to the building to eliminate all evidence. "My father told me the letters had been retrieved and Yuchan would be leaving within the week," the young man said hollowly. "When I heard about the fire, I thought it was an accident. A terrible coincidence. But then they arrested Concubine Bai He, and I started to wonder." He looked up at Chen Hao with devastated eyes. "He used me. He used my love for her to make me complicit in his plan, even without knowing what he really intended." Chen Hao's expression remained hard as stone. "Guards," he called. The hidden guards emerged from the shadows. "Arrest this man," Chen Hao commanded, "and send a unit to arrest Minister Feng Liang and the household guard who set the fire. They'll all face formal charges at dawn." "Your Majesty, please," the young man began. "You conspired to destroy evidence and helped facilitate the circumstances that led to attempted murder," Chen Hao said coldly. "Whether you knew your father's full intentions or not, you're complicit. Take him." As the guards led the sobbing young man away, Chen Hao turned to Yanling and me. "You two uncovered all of this together?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Temporary alliance," Yanling said with a slight smile. Turns out we both dislike being used as pawns. Chen Hao looked at me, and I saw the fear he'd been hiding behind his cold facade. You were nearly executed for something you didn't do, he said roughly. If you hadn't figured this out. But I did, I interrupted gently. With Yanling's help. He pulled me into his arms, not caring about propriety or Yanling's presence. I thought I'd lose you, he murmured against my hair. When he finally released me, he turned to Yanling. Thank you, Lady Yanling, he said formally, for helping clear Bai He's name and uncovering this conspiracy. Your service to justice will not be forgotten. Yanling bowed. Your Majesty, if I may speak freely? She asked. Please do, he said. I've spent 4 years trying to be what I thought you wanted, she said quietly. Beautiful, accomplished, perfectly obedient. I tried to earn your love through perfection. But Bai He. She glanced at me. She never tried to earn anything. She just is herself, challenging, honest, stubborn. And that's what you love about her. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. I do love her, Chen Hao said simply. But that doesn't diminish what you've contributed to this court, Yanling. You've shown intelligence, capability, and integrity tonight. That deserves recognition. I don't want recognition based on one night's work, Yanling replied. I want to build something that's mine, not dependent on royal favor or romantic politics. She smiled. Bai He taught me that. A woman refusing to be caged, even by golden bars. After Yanling departed, Chen Hao and I walked slowly back toward the inner palace. The night air was cool, peaceful now that the truth had been revealed. What will happen to them? I asked. To Feng Liang and his son? Feng Liang will be executed for conspiracy to commit murder, Chen Hao said grimly. His household guard as well. The son. He paused. The law demands execution for his involvement, but he was genuinely deceived about his father's true intentions. I'll consider exile instead. And you, Chan? I asked quietly. She'll be removed from the palace, he replied. Given a house in the countryside, enough money to live comfortably. She's a victim in all this. She deserves peace. We reached my courtyard gate, and he stopped, turning to face me fully. I thought I might lose you, he said, his voice raw. When I saw you in that throne room, accused of murder, potentially facing execution. But you didn't lose me, I said, reaching up to touch his face. I'm right here. He caught my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm. Bai He, I need to ask you something. Something important. My heart began racing. What? Become my queen, he said, the words both request and plea. Not just my concubine. Not just someone I love in shadows and stolen moments. I want you elevated to the highest position I can give you. I want you ruling beside me officially and publicly. I stared at him, stunned. Chen Hao, the ministers. The ministers will object, he said. They'll cite tradition and propriety and a dozen political concerns. I don't care. You've proven your worth 100 times over. You're intelligent, capable, brave. You deserve to be recognized for who you are, not kept invisible because of circumstances of birth. This will cause problems, I warned. Massive problems. I know, he said. But I'm asking anyway. Will you become my queen, Bai He? I looked at him, at the determination in his eyes, the love, the absolute certainty, and felt something shift in my chest. Yes, I whispered. Yes, I'll become your queen. The announcement of my elevation from concubine to queen sent shockwaves through the palace. By noon the next day, Minister Zhao Ming had requested an emergency council meeting. The ministers are furious, Chen Hao told me that evening as we walked in the gardens. They're calling it unprecedented, inappropriate, politically dangerous. Maybe they're right, I said quietly. Maybe elevating a concubine with no family connections is too radical. You're not just any concubine, he said firmly. You uncovered a conspiracy, you've contributed to policy reforms, you've shown more capability than most nobles I know. But, he paused. They're going to demand proof of that capability before they'll accept your elevation. They want to test me, I said. Minister Zhao Ming suggested a probationary period, he confirmed. 6 months where you take on official court duties, advise on governance, demonstrate your qualifications. If you succeed, even the strongest opposition will have to accept your investiture. And if I fail? I asked. You won't fail, he said with absolute confidence. But Bai He, you don't have to do this. I can elevate you immediately regardless of their objections. I'm the king, my word is law. I considered it carefully. The easy path would be to let him force the issue, to hide behind his royal authority. But that would only confirm every suspicion that I was unqualified, that I'd manipulated him with feminine wiles rather than earning the position through merit. I'll do it, I said. I'll prove I'm capable. But on one condition. What? He asked. You let me succeed or fail on my own merit, I said. No obvious favoritism, no special treatment. If I can't earn their respect myself, then I don't deserve to be queen. He looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Agreed, he said. Though watching you struggle without being able to help will be torture. You have faith in me, I said. That's help enough. The probationary period began the following week. I was given substantial responsibilities that would test my capabilities while giving the ministers ample opportunity to watch me fail. Advising on legal reforms, working with officials on public welfare initiatives, reviewing complex court cases, participating in council meetings where I was expected to offer valuable insights. It was exhausting work. Some ministers undermined me at every turn, dismissing my suggestions before I'd finished speaking. Others tested me with impossible questions, hoping to expose my lack of formal education. A few were simply hostile, making clear they believed a former concubine had no place in governance. But I'd spent years as a lawyer arguing cases against opponents who wanted to destroy me. Palace politics were vicious, but they were nothing I hadn't faced before in different forms. My knowledge of legal principles, which I carefully framed as understanding gained from voracious reading, proved invaluable when reviewing cases. I could identify procedural flaws, spot inconsistencies in testimony, suggest alternative interpretations of law that others had missed. My modern perspective, which I disguised as unconventional thinking, helped me see inefficiencies in palace administration. I proposed streamlining processes, eliminating redundant steps, creating clearer chains of authority. And perhaps most importantly, I listened. I sought out perspectives from servants, guards, minor officials, people whose insights were usually ignored, but who understood how the kingdom actually functioned at ground level. You're making progress, Yenling told me one afternoon over tea. Even the ministers who dislike you can't deny you're effective. There are still plenty who think I'm unqualified, I pointed out. Yes, but their objections are getting weaker, she replied. They're running out of legitimate criticisms and resorting to vague complaints about tradition and propriety. That means you're winning. 3 months into the probationary period, disaster struck, and opportunity arrived in the same moment. Heavy rains in the mountains caused the river to swell beyond its banks, flooding several villages near the capital. The crisis required immediate, coordinated response, evacuation of thousands of people, distribution of food and supplies, establishment of temporary shelters, provision of medical care. The council meeting called to address the emergency devolved into chaos. Ministers argued about whose jurisdiction the response fell under, what protocols should be followed, how to allocate resources. Meanwhile, reports kept arriving of rising waters and increasing casualties. I listened to them argue for 10 minutes before I'd had enough. With respect, we don't have time for jurisdictional debates, I said, standing up and projecting my voice to cut through the noise. People are drowning while we argue about bureaucratic procedures. Lady Bai He, this is a matter for... One minister began condescendingly. This is a matter for immediate action, I interrupted firmly. I propose we divide the response into 4 coordinated teams: evacuation, supplies, shelter, and medical care. Each team led by a minister with clear authority to make decisions in their area without waiting for full council approval. We coordinate through twice-daily briefings to ensure efforts aren't duplicated, but each team operates with autonomy. That's highly irregular, another minister objected. The proper procedure is designed for normal circumstances, I countered. This is an emergency. If we follow normal procedures, hundreds of people will die waiting for us to complete paperwork. I turned to Chen Hao. Your Majesty, I request permission to help coordinate the relief efforts. Chen Hao looked at me with unmistakable pride. Granted, he said. Minister Zhao Ming, you'll work with Lady Bai He on organizing the response teams. All other ministers, choose which team you'll lead or support. We begin implementation immediately. For the next 2 weeks, I barely slept. I coordinated between the different response teams, visited evacuation sites to assess needs firsthand, reviewed supply distributions to identify shortages, helped resolve conflicts when teams' efforts overlapped. I worked alongside servants and common officials, getting my robes muddy, my hands blistered, my hair disheveled. I made quick decisions based on incomplete information because waiting for perfect data meant people died. I listened to refugees' needs rather than assuming what they required. The nobles and ministers who dismissed me as an unqualified concubine saw me working tirelessly. They saw me making sound judgments under impossible pressure. They saw results: evacuation completed with minimal casualties, supplies distributed efficiently, shelters organized to accommodate families together, medical care reaching even the remotest affected areas. When the floodwaters finally receded and refugees began returning to rebuild their villages, Minister Jiaoming requested another council meeting. I objected to Lady Bai He's proposed elevation initially, he said, addressing the assembled ministers. I believed she lacked the proper background, training, and experience for queenship. My stomach tightened. This was it, the moment they would reject my qualification. I was wrong, Jiaoming continued, and relief flooded through me. Over the past 3 months, Lady Bai He has demonstrated exceptional intelligence, sound judgment, and genuine dedication to our kingdom's welfare. Her leadership during the flood crisis saved countless lives. She has earned not merely my approval, but my respect. I recommend we proceed with the investiture ceremony to elevate her to queen. One by one, other ministers voiced their agreement. Not all of them. A few still objected, citing tradition and propriety, but enough that the opposition crumbled into an irrelevant minority. When the meeting finally ended, Chen Hao found me in an empty corridor and pulled me into his arms despite the impropriety. You did it, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You won them over through pure merit. Not all of them, I said. Enough of them, he replied. He pulled back to look at me seriously. The investiture ceremony will be in 1 month. It's not just a simple ceremony. It's the formal elevation of a concubine to queen, which requires elaborate ritual. There will be marriage rites to formalize our union as equals, the conferral of title and authority, and your coronation. All performed together in the grand hall before the entire court. The weight of what I was accepting settled over me. That's significant, I said. It's enormous, he agreed. Are you ready for this? For everything it means, the responsibility, the scrutiny, the weight of helping govern a kingdom. I thought about it honestly. The responsibility was enormous. The scrutiny would be constant. Every decision I made would affect thousands of lives. But I also thought about the flood relief, about making real change, about having the authority to implement ideas that could genuinely help people. Yes, I said. I'm ready. The month of preparations passed in a blur. The investiture ceremony was a massive undertaking. Not just a celebration of our union, but a formal state occasion marking the unprecedented elevation of a concubine to queen. Zilan cried happy tears almost daily as she helped me prepare. Your Majesty, she would say, testing the title that would soon be mine. I still can't believe it. Neither can I sometimes, I admitted. Yanling helped me navigate the complex protocols and traditions. The ceremony follows ancient precedent, she explained one afternoon over tea. Though it's rare, most queens come from noble families. When a concubine is elevated, the ritual must be even more elaborate to signify the magnitude of the change in status. What exactly happens? I asked. First, the marriage rites, she said. Though you're already his concubine, this formalizes your union as equals. You'll bow to heaven and earth, to his ancestors, to each other. Then comes the conferral of title, where the senior minister reads the decree of your elevation, and you receive the queen's seal, as symbol of your authority. Finally, the coronation. The king places the crown on your head, and you rise as queen. It sounded overwhelming. And all this happens in front of the entire court? I asked. And representatives from every province, important nobles, foreign dignitaries, Yanling confirmed. Your elevation is a significant political moment. Everyone wants to witness it. The night before the ceremony, I stood alone in my chambers, the last night I'd spend in these rooms before moving permanently to the queen's residence, looking out at the palace grounds I'd come to know so well. A year and a half since I'd woken in this impossible world. From invisible concubine to queen. The journey felt both endless and impossibly brief. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Yenling entered carrying a small wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this before tomorrow," she said. Inside was an exquisite hair ornament, jade carved into lotus flowers with pearls dangling like dewdrops, clearly ancient and precious. "It's beautiful," I breathed. "It belonged to the previous queen," Yenling explained. His Majesty's mother. She was beloved by the people, intelligent, compassionate, strong. She governed beside the late king with wisdom and grace. She paused. "I think she would have approved of you." My throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you," I managed. "For this gift and for everything else. For becoming a friend when you could have remained an enemy. You make it difficult to stay enemies," she said with a slight smile. "You're too genuinely kind beneath all that stubbornness." Her expression grew more serious. "Take care of him, Bai He. He's a better man than most who wear crowns. He deserves someone who truly sees that." "I will," I promised. "Always." After she left, Chen Hao arrived, completely ignoring the tradition that we shouldn't see each other before the ceremony. "Breaking rules already?" I teased when he appeared at my door. "I learned from an expert," he replied, pulling me close. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," I admitted honestly. "Tomorrow changes everything." "Not everything," he said gently. "We'll still be us. Still two people who found each other against impossible odds. The titles and ceremonies don't change what matters." I rested my head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. "What if I'm not good at being queen?" I asked quietly. "You'll be extraordinary," he said with absolute certainty. "You already are." We stood together in comfortable silence until he finally, reluctantly, pulled away. "I should let you rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Chen Hao," I called as he reached the door. He turned back. "Yes." "Thank you," I said. "For believing in me. For fighting for this. For loving me despite, or maybe because of, how complicated I am." He smiled, warm and genuine. "Always," he said softly. "Always." The day of the investiture ceremony dawned clear and bright, as if the heavens themselves approved. I woke to Zilan and several other maids entering my chambers to begin the elaborate preparation process. "Your Majesty, well, not yet, but soon," Zilan said, her excitement barely contained. "We must begin. There's so much to do." The preparation took hours. First, the ritual bath with water infused with sacred herbs and flower petals. Then the elaborate makeup application. White powder to create a flawless base, red tint for lips and cheeks, carefully drawn eyebrows. My hair was arranged in the traditional style of a queen, an intricate construction of braids and loops that required 3 maids working in careful coordination. Yenling's gift, the previous queen's hair ornament, was placed at the crown of the arrangement, along with other precious ornaments of jade, gold, and pearls. Finally came the robes, layer upon layer of silk in deep crimson and gold, embroidered with phoenixes and peonies, so heavy and elaborate I needed assistance to walk. The outer robe alone must have weighed 20 pounds. When I finally looked at myself in the polished bronze mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked regal, powerful, every inch a queen. "You're beautiful, mistress," Zilan whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Don't cry," I said. "You'll make me cry, and then my makeup will be ruined." She laughed through her tears and carefully dabbed at her eyes. The procession to the grand hall felt surreal. I walked slowly, carefully, flanked by court ladies and preceded by officials carrying ceremonial banners. Musicians played traditional instruments, drums and bells and flutes, creating an otherworldly sound. The grand hall had been transformed into something magnificent. Red and gold silk banners hung from every pillar. Elaborate flower arrangements, peonies, chrysanthemums, orchids, filled the space with color and fragrance. Hundreds of seats were filled with nobles, ministers, provincial officials, foreign dignitaries. Every important person in the kingdom had come to witness this moment. At the front of the hall, Chen Hao waited in his full royal regalia, robes of black and gold embroidered with dragons, the king's crown on his head, the picture of absolute authority. But when our eyes met across the distance, I saw only warmth and love. The ceremony began with the sound of great drums. I processed slowly down the center aisle, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching my every step. Whispers followed me, wonder, approval, some lingering disapproval from those who would never accept my elevation. I reached the front of the hall and stopped before Chen Hao. He descended from his throne to stand beside me, and together we began the first part of the ceremony, the marriage rites. Though we were already joined as king and concubine, this would formalize our union as equals. A minister announced the ritual in a carrying voice. The union of heaven and earth, the joining of dragon and phoenix, the balance of yin and yang. Together, we bowed deeply to heaven and earth, acknowledging the cosmic forces that governed all life. We bowed to the tablets representing Chen Hao's ancestors, showing respect for those who came before. Finally, we turned and bowed to each other, equals recognizing equals. The ritual felt profound in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just political theater. It was a genuine acknowledgement that our partnership would be one of mutual respect, not domination and submission. When the marriage rites concluded, we turned to face the assembled court. Minister Zhao Ming, as the senior minister, stepped forward carrying a scroll, the official decree of my elevation. By ancient law and sacred tradition, Zhao Ming's voice rang through the hall. A concubine may be elevated to the position of queen when she has demonstrated exceptional virtue, wisdom, and capability. Lady Bai He has proven herself worthy through her intelligence in governance, her leadership during crisis, and her dedication to the kingdom's welfare. He unrolled the scroll and began reading the formal decree. The language was archaic, full of classical references and poetic phrases, but the meaning was clear. I was being elevated from concubine to queen, granted authority to govern beside the king, recognized as his equal in all matters of state. When Zhao Ming finished reading, a minister approached carrying a cushion on which rested the queen's seal, a heavy block of jade carved with intricate symbols of authority. Chen Hao took the seal and turned to me. "Kneel, concubine Bai He," he said formally, his voice carrying through the hall. I knelt before him, my elaborate robes pooling around me. "By the power vested in me as king," Chen Hao proclaimed, his voice strong and clear, "I elevate you, Bai He, from the position of concubine to the position of queen. You shall rule beside me with full authority. Your counsel shall be valued, your decisions respected, your place secured for all time. Do you accept this responsibility?" "I accept," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. He placed the queen's seal in my outstretched hands. The weight of it was significant, both physical and symbolic. This seal would be used to authorize decrees, validate documents, confirm my authority as queen. "Rise, Queen Bai He," Chen Hao said. I stood carefully, clutching the seal, and the hall erupted in formal applause. But the ceremony wasn't finished. One final ritual remained, the coronation. Another minister approached carrying the queen's crown on a silk cushion. It was breathtakingly beautiful, gold worked into delicate filigree, studded with jade and pearls, designed to represent both strength and grace. Chen Hao took the crown carefully. "This crown has been worn by queens for generations," he said, speaking to me but loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "It represents the weight of responsibility you accept, the authority you wield, the respect you command. Wear it with wisdom and compassion." He lifted the crown and placed it carefully on my head. The weight of it settled over me, heavier than I'd expected, but not unbearably so. "Behold," Chen Hao proclaimed, turning us both to face the court. "Queen Bai He." The hall erupted in cheers and applause, genuine now, not just ceremonial. I stood there in my elaborate robes and crown, holding the seal of authority, and felt the magnitude of what had just happened settle over me. I was no longer a concubine, no longer powerless or invisible. I was queen. The celebration feast that followed lasted for hours. Course after elaborate course appeared, delicacies from across the kingdom, each more intricate than the last. Entertainment filled the gaps between courses, musicians, dancers, acrobats, poets reciting verses composed specifically for the occasion. Nobles and officials approached our table in a steady stream to offer congratulations and pledges of loyalty. Some were genuinely warm, others merely politic, but I accepted them all with grace. "Your Majesty," one elderly minister said, bowing deeply. "I confess I had reservations about your elevation. But your handling of the flood crisis changed my mind. You will be a fine queen." "Thank you, Minister Chen," I replied. "I hope to prove worthy of your confidence." Lady Yenling approached during a brief lull, her expression warm. "Your Majesty," she said, the title spoken with genuine respect and affection. "You were magnificent during the ceremony. Truly regal." "I was terrified," I admitted quietly. "That's what made it authentic," she replied. "False confidence is easy to spot. Genuine courage despite fear, that's what people respect." She paused. "I'm leaving for the northern province next week. My new position awaits." "You'll do incredible things there," I said sincerely. "You're going to be an excellent administrator." "I learned from watching you," she said. "You showed me that real power comes from competence and integrity, not from romantic politics or manipulation." "Thank you for that lesson." After what felt like an eternity, the feast finally concluded. Chen Hao and I were escorted to the Queen's residence, our shared chambers now, by a ceremonial procession. Once the doors finally closed behind us, shutting out the world, I let out a long breath. "That was exhausting," I said. Chen Hao laughed and carefully removed the crown from my head, setting it on a stand designed for that purpose. "You were perfect," he said. "Every inch a queen." I felt like an imposter, I admitted. Like everyone could see I was just pretending to belong there. "You weren't pretending," he said firmly. He began helping me with the elaborate robes. It took both of us to remove all the layers. "You earned that crown, that seal, that position. Not through birth or manipulation, but through genuine merit." When I was finally freed from the heavy ceremonial clothing and dressed in simpler silk robes, I stood by the window looking out at the palace grounds bathed in moonlight. Chen Hao came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Being queen." "Surreal," I admitted. A year and a half ago, I thought my life was ending. I woke up in a stranger's body, in a world I didn't understand, terrified and completely alone. "And now," he prompted gently. "Now I'm queen of a kingdom I never expected to know," I said. "Married to a man I never thought I'd love. Living a life that shouldn't exist, but somehow does." He turned me to face him. "Are you happy, Bai He?" he asked seriously. "Truly happy? Because if this is too much, if being queen is more than you want—" "I'm happy," I interrupted, placing my hand over his heart. "This isn't the life I imagined. It's not even the life I would have chosen if given a choice. But it's the life I have, and it's the life I want. Every day I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." Relief and joy flooded his expression. He kissed me deeply, and I let myself fall into it, into him, into this impossible life I'd somehow made my own. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "We're going to do great things together," he murmured. "Change this kingdom for the better. Build something that lasts." "We already are," I said softly. The next morning, I woke in our shared chambers for the first time as queen. The reality of it settled over me as multiple maids. I now had an entire staff, not just Zealan, help me dress in the formal robes befitting my new position. "Your Majesty," one of the maids said respectfully, "the council is waiting for your first official meeting as queen." The council chamber felt different when I entered. The ministers all rose and bowed, not the shallow courtesy they'd shown the concubine Bai He, but the deep respect due to their queen. I took my seat beside Chen Hao's throne, not behind or below, but beside, and together we began the work of governing. The first item of business was follow-up on the flood relief efforts. Minister Jiaoming presented a report on the reconstruction progress, and I listened carefully before offering suggestions for improving the distribution of building materials. "An excellent observation, Your Majesty," Jiaoming said, nodding thoughtfully. "We'll implement that immediately." The meeting continued with discussions of trade agreements, legal reforms, provincial administration. Chen Hao and I worked in tandem. Sometimes he deferred to my judgment on matters of law and social welfare. Sometimes I deferred to his on military and foreign policy. We were partners, genuinely and openly. After the meeting concluded, several ministers approached me. "Your Majesty," Minister Chen said, "I wanted to discuss the legal reforms you proposed during the flood crisis. I believe they have merit beyond emergency situations." We spent an hour discussing potential applications, and by the end, we'd outlined a comprehensive reform package that would improve legal protections across the kingdom. This was what being queen meant, I realized. Not just ceremonies and crowns, but real work, real impact, real change. That evening, I sought out the gardens for a moment of peace after the intensity of the day. I found myself at the lotus pond where Chen Hao and I had first walked together, thinking about how far I'd come. Reflecting on your first day as queen? Chen Hao's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him approaching with a gentle smile. Reflecting on everything, I said. On how strange life is. How unpredictable. He settled beside me on the bench. Do you miss your old life? He asked quietly. The one before all this? I thought about the woman I'd been. Successful but lonely, accomplished but unfulfilled, dying alone in the back of a taxi without anyone to mourn her. No, I said honestly. That life was ending anyway. This life, this impossible, complicated, beautiful life, it's everything I never knew I wanted. Even with all the responsibility, he asked. All the scrutiny and challenge? Especially because of that, I replied. In my old life, I worked hard but never felt like I was making a real difference. Here, the work I do changes people's lives. The decisions we make matter in tangible ways. I took his hand. And I get to do it with you. He pulled me close, and we sat together as the sun set, watching the light transform the gardens into something magical. I love you, he said against my hair. I love you too, I replied. Over the following months, I settled fully into my role as queen. It wasn't always easy. There were still ministers who resented my elevation, nobles who whispered about my common origins, endless protocols and traditions to navigate. But Chen Hao and I faced each challenge together. We implemented the legal reforms Minister Chen and I had developed, expanding protections for the accused and creating clearer judicial processes. We improved the welfare systems, ensuring aid reached even the most remote villages. We established education programs that would teach basic literacy and numeracy to children regardless of their family's status. The changes were ambitious, often met with resistance from traditionalists who preferred the old ways. But slowly, steadily, we began to see results. You're reshaping this kingdom, Yanling wrote in a letter from her northern province. People here speak of Queen Bai He with admiration. They say she's different from past queens, more accessible, more concerned with common welfare. You're giving them hope. I shared the letter with Chen Hao that evening. I'm not doing it alone, I said. You're the one who gave me the authority to make these changes. I gave you the title, he corrected. You're the one using it to transform lives. That's all you, Bai He. One evening several months into my reign, I stood in the gardens looking out at the palace grounds. The air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear music and laughter from a celebration in the servants' quarters. Chen Hao found me there, as he always did. What are you thinking about? He asked, slipping his hand into mine. About choices, I said. About how the strangest paths sometimes lead to exactly where we need to be. About how dying in one world gave me life in another. Do you still think about that world sometimes? He asked. The one you came from? Sometimes, I admitted. But not with regret. That world, that life, it ended so this one could begin. And I wouldn't trade this for anything. He pulled me close, and I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Around us, the palace hummed with life. A kingdom full of people whose lives we were working to improve, challenges we would face together, a future we were building one decision at a time. I'm grateful, I said quietly, for this impossible second chance, for the courage to refuse to be invisible, for finding love when I least expected it. I'm the grateful one, Chen Hao murmured. You could have been anyone. You could have accepted being a forgotten concubine, could have played the games everyone expected. Instead, you refused to be anything but yourself. That's what I fell in love with, your absolute refusal to be diminished. I looked up at him, this man who'd seen past every wall I'd built, who'd loved me not despite my complications but because of them. We're going to keep changing things, I said. Keep pushing boundaries, keep challenging traditions that need challenging. I know, he said with a smile. I'm counting on it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always new challenges. A diplomatic crisis brewing with a neighboring kingdom. Drought concerns in the western provinces. 100 small decisions that would ripple out to affect thousands of lives. But tonight, standing in the gardens with the man I loved, with the weight of the Queen's crown waiting in our chambers, I felt ready for all of it. The concubine who'd refused the king had become the queen who changed everything. And this was only the beginning of what we would build together.